and welcome to New England Authors with Kameel Nasr. It's so good to have you with us. Our show aims to share throughout the New England the wonderful people that we have here and to build our regional identity. And today we hold the honor of having Professor Julie Nelson, one of the founders and most highly cited scholars in the field of feminist economics, which we will explore with her along with her latest book, Gender and Risk-Taking, Economics, Evidence, and Why the Answer Matters. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Kameel.
You're a founding member of the International Association for Feminist Economics.
Correct.
And you were the associate editor of the Journal of Feminist Economics and professor of economics at UMass Boston. Your work challenges a lot of our thoughts about economics. First of all, you start by telling us about Adam Smith, which I guess was the founder of economics, right?
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
And tell us, what is traditional economics and what is it that you think should change?
Yeah. Well, there's almost two Adam Smiths. There's the Adam Smith that actually existed and wrote, and there's Adam Smith as understood by free market folks.
I see, yes.
So Adam Smith actually wrote two books, The Wealth of Nations,
right,
which is his theory about
yes.
market stress, and A Theory of Moral Sentiments.
I didn't even know that, yes.
Which is about human sympathy and human working ways that human beings work together.
Yes.
And what a lot of gets cited as Adam Smith as a complete laissez-faire, trust everything to competition, is very much a Bowdlerized version.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our religion, isn't it? The science of economics, right?
Can I put scare quotes on science?
It's been our religion. So obviously, you are bringing something different to the table. Economics was mostly men, right?
It has been and still is.
And still is.
Male-dominated.
Male-dominated, even though we have many economic theorists that are women. No?
There were some. I mean, we've had Janet Yellen heading up the Fed. That's the most notable highly ranked woman. But it's a small number that are allowed into the areas of power.
So tell us, what's wrong with traditional Adam Smith as we viewed Adam Smith, as opposed to the historical Adam Smith?
Okay, let's just talk about the traditional free market views and the sort of core theories in economics. People think of different things when you say the word economics. Some people think of Wall Street and the stock market and the finance pages. As a discipline, it is somewhat broader than that. It is more about how businesses, markets, governments, households together create markets, exchange, this sort of thing. The academic discipline of economics, however, looks at this whole thing going on, how we make our money, how we get what we need to eat, how we build businesses, how we govern ourselves on economics. The discipline of economics has decided to treat that all as something that can be studied only with math, and in a very narrow model of what human beings are about. Yeah. Human beings are autonomous, self-interested, rational, and they just interact kind of at arm's length with each other on these markets. Now, Adam Smith did just kind of kick that Paul off. He had some lines in his works about the economy as an enormous machine, and with systems and with parts.
Right.
And then later economists took it and ran with it, found they could use Newtonian calculus, as a tool, and decided that they could make a physics-like science out of this.
So was Milton Friedman the inheritor of Adam Smith?
Well, Adam Smith's legacy has turned up in a bunch of different places. Milton Friedman is one of the big true believers in the idea that you can leave everything to markets.
Exactly, yes.
That you don't need, just markets and competition will make everything work for everyone's well-being.
You came out with this book several years ago, Economics from Humans.
For humans.
Huh?
Economics for humans.
For humans.
Yes.
Which I liked and read and liked. So tell us a little about what does it mean for humans as opposed to for markets?
Yeah. Actually, this one I've got a second edition coming out in September of this book.
Oh, good.
So,
Okay.
So this one, I actually, we started out talking about Adam Smith. You've got The Wealth of Nations and Theory of Moral Sentiments. A lot of what this book is about is why we economists have only run with the Wealth of Nations part in this very mechanical, cold model that says the economy is over here, and society and moral sentiments and everything that makes us human is over here.
Right, yeah.
And never the twain should meet in
Yes.
terms of the methodologies we use or the assumptions we make about people's action. And this has some really bad real world consequences. One, as a feminist, I've looked at women's contributions to the economy. And the whole area of caring labor, the unpaid care that's done in the home,
Yes.
unpaid child care,
Yes.
as well as low paid work. Child care workers make less than parking lot attendants these days. You get less money for watching the next generation and nurturing that than you do for watching a parked car.
Yes.
So these low-paid areas of caring work, I think in part they're starved because that's considered not economic. And it's almost like we have to protect it from markets and money.
Yeah.
There's even an article written once, why a poorly paid nurse is a better nurse. Because that way only the altruist would take the job.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
I see. Yeah.
Just bizarre logic. This idea that
Yeah.
care and responsibility and cooperation are not a part of economics.
Yeah.
So in this book, I try to break that down and say, no, really, caring jobs should be well paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other side of that is we tend to think that markets and business and firms is all about competition and self-interest. Actually, it takes a lot of cooperation to keep a business firm running.
Yeah.
And when we can start to realize that, we can start to break down this divide we've had between the economy and
So
society.
did you know also at one time female teachers were not allowed to marry?
Oh, yeah. Right, yeah. Or especially if they got pregnant, then they were definitely out. You wouldn't want children to know where babies came from.
Right. Now, your latest book, Gender and Risk-Taking, you challenge the assumption or that most of us have that males are more risk-taker, are better, take more risks, and females take fewer risks.
Yeah, there's a stereotype about that.
Right. Yeah,
and
so,
the problem is, there are some areas in which, like driving fast or something like that. If you take 20-year-olds, there's a larger difference. But the problem is when people talk about gender differences, and a lot of the economic studies are more about like lottery games, how much people bet, rather than things like driving fast. So there's different aspects of risk. But even if you're talking about driving fast or any of these other behaviors, as soon as you say that men and women are different, people think, okay, all men take risks and women are all cautious.
Right.
And never, when you study actual behavior, the actual data, does it look like that.
Yes.
It's always overlapping. There's always some women that take a lot of risks, some men that take fewer risks, no matter how you're measuring that. The study that I did was, I was noticing the economics literature, a lot of articles coming about saying women are more risk averse than men. And mostly they would bring a bunch of people in a room and give them some money and say, well, how much do you want to bet on something risky and how much do you want to hold on to?
Yeah.
So it's mostly about financial risk. But I did a meta-analysis. I got the actual data from a lot of these studies and took a look at it. And the overlap is almost 100%. It's like,
Really?
like 94%. If you didn't know somebody's sex and you were to guess whether of the two people who takes more risks, you'd have a 50-50 chance, right? Because you're just going to guess arbitrarily.
Yes.
If you know that one's a man and one's a woman, your chance of being correct goes all the way up to 54%.
Oh.
Woohoo!
So
That's the size of the difference we're talking about. It's almost entirely over. There's sometimes a difference between the averages, but really men and women are a lot more the same than different.
Just on that, there was another study that showed when boys and girls were in the same room together, the boys wanted to compete much more than the girls. But when the girls were all together, they competed among themselves just as strongly.
Yeah, there's a number of different studies in competition. And one of the things to remember when looking at the results of those studies is there are different social rewards and penalties for men and women for competing. There's few things that most guys like less than losing to a woman, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely right. Yes, absolutely.
And most women know that.
Yeah.
And if there's something riding on this that they don't want to be perceived as overly aggressive, that can change risk-taking behavior or competition behavior in groups, because there's penalties.
Yeah, a lot of this is psychology as opposed to economics, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a field called behavioral economics, which has kind of reinvented the psychology study wheel.
And is behavioral economics more like feminist economics? Or?
Not particularly. It does criticize, it is a little bit more realistic in its assumptions about how people behave. And in that sense, it has something in common with feminist economics. We also have questioned the idea that people are always rational, that emotions don't make any difference, that the body, the fact that we're actually got wetware here, we're not logic machines, makes a difference. In that sense, there's some overlap. This book, however, was actually a meta-analysis of behavioral economics literature, and what it shows is that a lot of people working in that field end up finding their own stereotypes. It's called confirmation bias. You tend to see what you already believe.
Oh, yes,
and I actually have that documented in this book, how people see one thing and then say something that has nothing to do with what the data actually said.
Okay, we're talking with Professor Julie Nelson. This is New England Authors. Professor Nelson, tell us, define feminist economics for us. Can you do that? Or you were the board member or something, the founding member of the Association for Feminist Economics, so you must be able to define it. Right?
Well, it was fun. I'm also was co-editor of a book that's been come to be called the Manifesto of Feminist Economics.
Oh, right.
So I am an author of a manifesto.
Yeah.
And actually in a follow-up book, that book was called Beyond Economic Man, we did a follow-up book 10 years later, and we wanted to do a little survey, so we actually had to come up with a definition. And we said that feminist economics is, it studies the relations of people according to gender with a liberatory bent. This is important because some people just throw gender in equations, have no idea.
With a what bent?
Liberatory, emancipatory.
Oh, I see.
There's ways of studying gender that just reiterate old stereotypes and and create newer ways of creating oppression and discrimination. So it's those kinds of studies, and that look at the definitions, models, and methods of the discipline informed by feminist thinking.
Yeah. How does feminist economics change the world we live in?
I wish it had changed more at this point. It's been going as a field since the early 1990s. The places where there have been the most success, I would say, is in the development economics. That is looking at what helps countries come out of poverty. And it used to be that a lot of development economics only looked at the male farmers, the male policymakers, the men. And then it was realized that women are actually bringing up the next generation. Women need to be educated. Their decisions are going to decide population size, all the rest of this. And so there's been a much more attention to women and to women being able to develop more rights and capabilities in order for countries, economies, to escape poverty. I believe that feminist economics could have a large impact. I think our whole political and economic structure right now is quite screwed up. A lot of inequality, a lot of arguing between people who say, government is bad, business is good, and then there's other people that say business is bad, government is good, and no.
Well, I mean,
a lot of those people share these assumptions. Actually, what I was saying about these mechanical assumptions about the economy.
Right.
Once you can get past those, you can start to see a lot more ways of moving forward.
So, would feminist economics help the caretaker, was it, who got less money than the parking attendant? Would that change? Would that change it around? How would you rectify the income inequality that we have?
Well, there's a lot of, I mean, the sort of standard economist story is that we're really in a meritocracy. What you earn is what you deserve based on your human capital investments and your abilities and the rest of this. I mean, that was not surprisingly invented by people who are in a privileged position.
That's right.
Things like caregiving. There's the fancy word for history in economics called hysteresis, which just means that history matters. Patterns set up in the past matters. When women first came into paid work, they often came in fields like nursing and teaching.
Yeah.
And often they were married with a husband supporting them. They were nuns,
right,
taking a vow of poverty, or they're young single women who are transitioning between their father's household and their husband's household and really didn't need to earn more than just enough to get by. That's not the case anymore.
No.
Okay?
No,
a lot of women are supporting families.
Right.
A lot of women are the major earner in their families. And yet still, we see a lot of women in those professions. And also the men also make lower incomes in those professions. So a lot of that is just, we got in the habit of thinking this stuff just kind of arises out of the woodwork and doesn't need to be rewarded. Then when market stuff kicks in, usually if in a market there's a shortage of workers, what do economists say? Well, if you raise the wage, that would increase the supply of workers and that would balance the market. When it comes to nurses, they say, you have to import more. Okay, we've got a lot of, say, Filipino nurses working in the U.S. because they can't get around the idea that you could actually raise the wage to make this an attractive job.
Right.
Or they'll do things like child care networks will do things like have, caregiver of the month and, various titles and non-monetary awards. I went to a very sad conference one time where they're talking about creating more of a career path for child care workers, where they could go out and they could get, do some extra early childhood education credits, et cetera. And all of this boiled up to like a 50-cent an hour raise in the wage.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. They're just in the wrong ballpark. Okay. These are jobs with a lot of responsibility.
Right.
And they should be compensated for the kind of responsibility and knowledge that goes in there.
How do we change this? I mean, we want to change. We want nurses to get a good wage and hedge fund managers to get a lower wage. Right?
Well, a lot of this, it has to do with exploding these things that we have that, care is over here and money is over there. The thing about, I told you there was a title of an article on why a badly paid nurse is a good nurse.
Yes.
Because then only altruists will take the jobs because I haven't seen one about why a badly paid CEO is a good CEO.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, if that logic works for nurses, then a badly paid CEO should be the one that really looks out for their shareholders, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And we don't. What we see is most CEOs are not looking out even for their shareholders, much less the environment or their employees at all. They're looking out for themselves and robbing the shareholders and everybody else blind.
So, would feminist economics be more attuned to the environment and global warming and so on?
I think that there's a strong link. Some people say, well, women are closer to nature, and that's why, and I don't buy that one at all, okay? But I do buy the idea, if you look at how economics has treated the natural environment and how it's treated traditional work of women, there's a very close parallel. Both natural resources and children just kind of arise in economic models out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And sort of the waste products at the end, people that are sick, elderly, old, waste products in terms of pollution, all of those things just kind of magically disappear.
Right.
Neither of those are thought about in standard economic models.
Right.
And in feminist economics, there's developed a large literature on care, on caring labor, on nursing, on childcare, on all of this. But we also need to care for the environment. And I think some of that development of work from about caring for people translates to caring for the environment. And meanwhile, some work done by ecological economists who are seriously concerned about the environment can carry over into feminist work.
Yeah. What's your next project? You've came out with this gender and risk-taking. What are you looking at now?
Well, actually, I said the second edition of Economics for Humans is coming out in a few months.
And
part of the reason, one of the things that I put in there is a chapter on the environment.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so tying back into your last question, that these things do come together. And then I just expanded and updated. I have a lot of things in there about court cases and such.
Back in good old days, even 100 years ago, women had to have like 6-8 children, and many died in infancy, and many women died in childbirth, and the whole world was a lot different now. Isn't it going to take quite a while until we find out how the genders work together, how male-female work together? We've only had a few generations now.
There have been a lot of changes over the last few generations.
Certainly,
but I've seen a whole lot of change just in my lifetime. Not as much as I would like. but I certainly think the world is better for my
What do you see in your
daughter.
students? Do you see emancipated women, or what's the story?
I see a variety of things. I guess the ones that are closest to your question is I see more acceptance of the idea that women should have equal rights and be able to achieve and have their abilities recognized, up to the point where kids come into the picture. Right. And then a lot of very traditional, on a lot of the women's side, a kind of rosy view comes up that they're going to have a partner that's going to be an equal parent with them, and that's going to allow them to continue on. Yeah. A lot of the men, if you dig deep enough, think their wives are going to stay home, or go part-time or something like that. Mm-hmm. So there's actually been some sociology studies on this about the differences in expectations. So a lot of the real work that needs to be done. I mean, there's still work to be done in workplaces. Obviously, with the Me Too movement and sexual harassment on the job, there's even more work still to be done in households and families about men taking on responsibilities there.
Now, speaking of sociology, you kind of alluded in one of the articles that I read that economics was very male and sociology was very female. Have I got that right?
That's putting it a little bit too starkly. It is, sociology has a higher proportion of women as sociologists than does economics. I did an article, though, that looked back at the statements of purpose of founding of the American Sociological Association and compared it to the statement of founding of the Econometric Society, which is one of the more mathematical branches of economics. And these develop within a couple decades of each other or whatever. And if you do any kind of analysis of language, the difference that pops out is just hits you over the head. The Econometric Society once said something about, we want to use the kind of methods that have come to, I don't remember the whole quote, but that have come to dominate in the physical sciences. The mathematical methods. The American Sociological Association statement says, essentially, well, we don't want to step on anybody's toes, and we'll come up with some results and see if other people like them. And so there was a real positioning, gender-wise, of the disciplines with economics. For sociologists to co-author with an economist is a step up. Vice versa, it's a step down. And this is widely recognized across both disciplines.
I see. So you've traveled internationally to many conferences. Do you notice differences between America and other countries in terms of gender?
Well, my main thing traveling abroad is who is most embarrassed about their current government. That's been up and down over the years. In terms of, obviously the Scandinavian countries are way ahead in terms of parental leaves. Some of the parental leave is use or lose. That is, if the father doesn't take it, it goes away. So there's real encouragement of men to take more family roles. There's still some occupational segregation in occupations, but the wage gap is smaller. Scandinavian countries are further ahead.
What about Asian countries? You've been to Asia a few times.
China's got a new bursting economy. Legally, women are still in an inferior situation. Really? I believe they cannot own the family house or even have an ownership share in it. Again, there's a lot more things to be done.
What about in the United States? I think you said in Economics for Humans that a woman earns 81 cents to a man's dollar. Is that right? That's also
a kind of a slogan, bumper sticker version that gets rid of some of the subtleties. It means that the average wage earned by full-time year-round workers, women's wages are 81% of men's. Sometimes people add on at the same job. And that's actually not correct.
That's not true.
No, that actual statement. There can be differences even if you just look within jobs, but that widely bandied about number also includes the spread across occupations.
So now are there many more women in economics, in the traditional economics? So you mentioned Janet Yellen. Are there many more, or is it still a
the
male
numbers
field?
have gotten somewhere around 25% of PhDs coming out of graduate school in economics are women, and that has not gone up much in the last like 20 years. It's
really?
hold around there.
It's still a male thing. How do you account for what do you account for that? And how do you think it could change?
There are, I mean, some of it has to do with the actual environment. There's been some surveys about attitudes about gender among academics in various areas, and economists tend to have some of the most stereotyped views. And there's a recent one I saw that was just a bunch of coverage in some The Guardian and other newspapers about economics and gender, that quite a number of male economists think that being female actually gives you an advantage in the profession. Now, much less that it's a disadvantage. Again, this idea that there's a meritocracy, and if men have been doing it for so long, it must just be because men are better at it, goes very deep.
Okay.
And stereotypes about math ability and the rest of this are also very deep.
I just, we're just coming to wrap up a little bit. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about gender and risk-taking. And can you just summarize a little bit more about your findings?
Okay. The findings are empirically that men and women are a lot more similar than different in the area of risk-taking. So if you hear about difference, don't think about this. Think about almost 100% overlap. I think that has consequences for the larger economy, particularly in financial markets and in the environment. Both financial markets and environmental policy making have been thought of as male sort of areas, and males have been thought of as risk takers. So there's kind of this gung-ho, take all the risk you want in finance, and gung-ho will get technology to solve environmental problems for us. And I think we need to notice that is biasing the way we're seeing things and really limiting our view of what needs to be done and what can be done.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Professor Julie Nelson. This is New England Authors, produced in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and aired in stations across New England. Remember, watch locally. Thank you.